I read 14 dark romance books in 14 days for Valentine's Day, and today I want to talk about The King of Nothing by Mona Black. This is a reverse harem Peter Pan retelling where Wendy Darling is whisked away to a dark dreamscape that only she can save by a man who's been following her since she was a little girl. This book is high on the dark content. There's a lot of really explicit on-page spice, and a lot of it's really violent. So make sure that you check out the trigger warnings. I'll put those on the screen. If any of these bother you, this is definitely not the book for you. This stuff is pretty heavy, so just be aware of that going into it. While we're on the subject of content warnings, videos like this tend to get sort of pushed to the side by YouTube in favor of more family-friendly content. So if you are into dark romance or you just like darker books in general and you prefer adult content and you want to make sure that you get more of that, you can train YouTube's algorithm by hitting the like button and subscribing to my channel. It'll show you more videos by people like me who are reviewing these kinds of books. It also helps other people who are into these kinds of stories find them better. So you're basically helping build the community by doing so. If you want to support what I'm doing here personally, you can subscribe to the Patreon, or you can join us on Discord and join the conversation. We talk about books and writing and just sort of life in general over there. So you're more than welcome to join us there as well. Okay, back to the book. I want to go over some of the things that I really liked in this book and some of the things that didn't work so well for me. But before I do, I want to go over the plot a little bit. There will be some very light early book spoilers. I'm certainly not going to spoil the whole story for you or tell you how it turns out. But if even a little bit of light spoiler bothers you, you can use the timestamps down below. I always make sure that I timestamp my videos. So if you want to skip the spoilers or if any of the content warnings that we mentioned earlier, I'll put those back on the screen. If any of this stuff bothers you or is something that you don't want to hear discussed or don't want to read about, you can skip over the plot summary and go right to the end. So Wendy Darling is a financially struggling coffee shop barista who has a roommate named Charlie. Now, you don't need to worry too much about Charlie. Just know that she is the only person in Wendy's life who actually gives a damn about her. She has no friends. She has no family. There's just Charlie. So when she gets taken later, nobody really notices and nobody really cares. And I think that it's set up that way so you don't feel like she has a lot to get back to. And you're not really worried about people worrying about her or that people are going to try to find her or something. It's sort of the like orphan thing that they do in fantasy books or like YA novels or coming of age novels, middle grade novels, where there's no parents and there's no siblings, so nobody cares that the person's gone off on this adventure. It was an interesting choice. I don't know that I would have selected it, but yeah. So don't worry about Charlie. Charlie's not important. Just know that Wendy had a roommate named Charlie, and Charlie doesn't matter. So we get a few introductory pages of Wendy like going through getting ready in the morning to go to work, and then she and Charlie are like having coffee, and Wendy keeps talking about she's late. And it's all very like White Rabbit from Alice in Wonderland. And for some reason, the girls start talking over coffee about all the guys that they've boinked and how dissatisfied and boring Wendy has found all of them, which is an interesting choice given that you're late for work and trying to rush out the door to get into that kind of conversation. But yeah, basically that is the setup so that we buy into it a little easier later when Wendy goes gaga for the rough treatment that the Lost Boys are giving her, and they really give it to her. So Wendy rushes out the door. She is on her way to work, and some guy jumps out of an alley and tries to like grab her, and then she's saved by a second guy who also jumps out of a different alley and then sort of like pushes the first guy back with this like Eldritch Blast magic sort of situation, and then promptly stabs her in the chest. You don't need to worry about the stabbing. That doesn't really come back up. She's not injured. And the guy who had magic that saved her winds up not having magic. And why that part was left in or included, I'm not really sure. So that happened. So Wendy thinks she's dying, but instead of being dead on a street corner, she wakes up on a beach next to the ocean. I should also mention here that Wendy has a severe phobia of open bodies of water, just water in general. It's mentioned that she doesn't like to bathe because of things that happened in her past. And it's sort of alluded that a relative of hers did bad things to her in a dock house, and that the sound of water is sort of ingrained in her mind as this wicked thing. And we don't really get to know much more about that, other than she's afraid of water. Anyway, so she wakes up on a beach next to this really, really hot guy. I mean, like, he's so hot that she's promptly forgets that she was stabbed in the chest and almost murdered, and that she's not where she went unconscious, and starts thinking about doing him on the beach. But they don't have time because they get attacked by a mermaid, which in this book is not a beautiful creature, a beautiful, like, Disney-style sea creature. Instead, it's this weird sort of like half-decayed undead thing that's half and half, yeah, but the top half is like skeletal or zombie-like, and with a face like a skull that's sort of like hauling itself out of the water and trying to snatch them. Mermaids are venomous in this story, by the way, and one of them like gets a hold of Peter, and its grip puts venom in his leg. So he's really having a hard time walking, but Wendy's in danger and she just freezes. So he throws her over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes, because apparently Wendy's fight or flight response is basically just freeze in place. Now that is a real thing. That is a thing that happens. Panic can actually make some people just freeze and become completely non-responsive. I know this because I am one of those people who has that sort of fright response, particularly with fire. So I know that that's a real thing, that people can just get so afraid that they can't respond at all. So he just kind of picks her up and hauls her away. So while he's hauling her through the woods over his shoulder, limping, of course, because he's injured, that won't come up again later. Like, it's used for like one chapter, and then it just magically goes away. But he doesn't have any magic, don't worry. It's all very inconsistent. It's all very inconsistent. Anyway, so while he's hauling her through the forest, they make their introductions. He is Peter Pan, King of Neverland, which is where they happen to be, and she is Wendy Darling, dreamer of dreams, queen of nightmares, and creator and keeper of Neverland, because Neverland exists in the dreams of women named Wendy. Unfortunately, Neverland is sick. Neverland is dying, illustrated either by Wendy's dreams or because of Wendy's dreams. She has really terrible nightmares, night terrors, full-on night terrors. And so because Neverland is dying, Peter Pan is also dying. And so she sort of discovers over the next few chapters that Peter and the Lost Boys have kidnapped dozens, maybe hundreds of women named Wendy, and brought them to Neverland with the hope that bringing them there will somehow fix the dream that they know that they exist in. They're aware that they exist in a dream. And so they keep taking these women named Wendy. The problem is, like, Neverland exists in the Fey realm, sort of, and it causes mortals, it causes humans to go insane. And so every Wendy they bring kind of goes crazy and like jumps off a cliff and dies, and they just keep doing it over and over and over again, and there's no telling how many women have died like after they've taken them, and some of them last a week or two and some of them last a few months, but none of them survive. So on top of all of that, on top of Neverland being a hellscape because of Wendy's night terrors, Peter Pan is also losing his mind because he pissed off the fairies, and they tried to like steal his shadow, which sort of like half tore it from his body. It's still attached, but only barely, and that connection is really tenuous and is starting to unravel. So now it just sort of like every now and then will take hold of him and turn him into a murderous psychopath. And he just randomly forgets things. Like, he'll be just, going along having a conversation. He'll sort of like zone out for a second. And the Lost Boys explain it as basically like he can see other realities. So he'll just sort of phase out for a second. When he comes back, he doesn't remember anything that's happened in the reasonably immediate future. There's Lost Boys also, 3 of them. You've got Tink, as in Tink Bell, who is a gorgeous half-fae mongrel with a serious violent streak. And and a pair of mirrored twins called Colt and Wesson, who goes by Wes, who are mirror images of each other. So one is pale with black hair and the other is dark with white hair. And they're basically imposed, but they have the same features. And one of them was a human child and the other was a changeling child. But it's been so long that they've been in Neverland so long they can't remember which is which. And of course, they're all tremendously attractive young men, and Wendy is instantly into them, instantly attracted to them, because who wouldn't be when you're torn from your home in a fit of terror, so long as your kidnappers are super, super hot. We're just going to ignore the fact that they're all literal monsters who have every intention of driving her to insanity and death, because none of that matters as long as the boink is good. Okay, so Wendy is hot and ready for the Lost Boys, and that's unfortunate because the Lost Boys have a policy that they don't fuck the Wendys for reasons. Something about it messing up the magic that's never really explained, and it's never really explained why they think that, other than I think it's just sort of laced in there as a, we're not supposed to do this, but we're going to do it anyway, tee-hee, it's naughty. It's something about the brutality of the way that they choose to engage in those types of activities that makes them go insane faster or messes up their magic that they're supposed to have to like control the stream and put things back together. But like I said, none of it's really explained. We're never really given a reason why, or the reason is never explained thoroughly enough that it makes any sense. There's a lot of things in this book that don't make a lot of sense. Anyway, as you might expect, that doesn't hold up. And very, very soon after arriving on the island, everybody is boinking everybody. They are tucking all kinds of things into all types of orifices, repeatedly and generally relatively violently, which Wendy's really into, so I guess that's all good. Wendy's getting it on with the twins, Peter's getting it on with Wendy, the twins are getting it on with each other, and everybody is just having a ripe old time with it, except for Tink, who apparently tends to lose control and literally rip girls in half, so he just kind of stays celibate. So basically, the entire book is about Peter losing his mind, which is slowly damaging the island, or the island is falling apart, which is slowly damaging Peter's mind. And it's sort of explained both ways, like they're so interlaced and so symbiotic that they're falling apart together. Wendy is the dreamer, and so she's the only thing that can put it back together. And the way that she's going to do that is just by bunking the Lost Boys into oblivion. There's a lot of sex. Okay, so let's talk about some of the things I liked. The world building was cool. The way that Neverland was described was interesting. It felt very ethereal. There's sort of this like post-apocalyptic dreamscape sort of situation going on, where there's like modern remnants of civilization that are crumbling and falling apart. And I thought that was a really interesting choice. I liked the way that the world was described. I thought that was well done. I feel like the author did a really good job with Peter and his bouts of forgetfulness, peppered with like bursts of anger. I feel like the way that Tink was written, with his sort of like teetering on the edge of sanity and his uncertainty and sort of the war between his very violent, unseelie side and his like very human, very like, I want to care for this person and nurture this person, and sort of him seesawing back and forth between that. I think that was pretty well done. It was very clearly conveyed that that's what was going on. I feel like the story was okay. Conceptually, it was a lot better than its actual execution, which brings me to some of the things that I think could have been done better. So I feel like the plot itself was really rushed and maybe not as thoroughly planned out or as thoroughly woven as it could have been or should have been, because we were rushing from sex scene to sex scene, right? So there are two types of dark romance books. There are the dark romances that focus on the spice, and then there are the dark romances that focus on the plot. And when you're dealing with this sort of book, which is basically erotica, where they're focused on the spice and the plot is just sort of background to help drive you from sex scene to sex scene, it falls down a little bit for me, because that's not really my thing. If that's what you like, and really all you're reading dark romance for is the spice, this has plenty of it. It's very descriptive. It's definitely dark. So if that's your thing, you might really like this. But I like plot. I like story. The spicy stuff can be added in to sort of enhance the story or to add a little titillation. Like, that's fine. It doesn't bother me. But like, I read books because I want the story. And I feel like the story was the background and the spice was the purpose, and I didn't really like that. I also feel like the prose detracted from the storytelling quite a bit. I might have been able to get more into the story if it didn't have this sort of like fourth wall breaking 90s rom-com sort of attempt at Deadpool humor, but it didn't quite make it. It just felt very, I don't know, it felt very young. I don't know. I felt old reading this story, and maybe it's just because it wasn't written for me. Maybe I am too old for it. I don't know. But I didn't like the prose. I didn't like the way that the story was narrated. Now, if it was just the characters' dialogue and it was just the characters using younger language, like, that's fine. Whatever. They're supposed to be 20 or they're whatever. The thing is, they're not, though, right? Like, the Lost Boys are supposed to be several hundred years old, and they all use very modern language, and it's all very quippy and very bantery, which was really weird, considering the fact that these guys are supposed to have been trapped on this island for several hundred years and have no exposure to, like, TikTok, which is basically what this read like. It read like TikTok. It's all just very, like, edgy language and very like quippy and bantery, and I got the feeling it was trying to be cool and it didn't quite make it, or maybe it was and I'm just not cool enough to understand it. I don't know, but the language and the prose and the way that it was narrated did not work for me at all. All 6 of the characters in this book get their own perspective chapters, and I'm not sure that was necessary. The characters' voices were not unique enough to give them each their own perspective chapter. Peter's felt unique. Wendy's felt just weird. She felt like a porn actress. It's Colt and Wesson, you couldn't tell them apart. Every time I was in a Colt or Wesson chapter or a Tink chapter, I basically had to just constantly go back to the first page and check and see whose perspective I was supposed to be reading from, which tells me that they didn't need their own perspectives. Their voices were not developed enough to give them their own chapters. I also found the storytelling really repetitive. It really hammered home over and over and over on several points. The fact that the Wendys go insane and jump off a cliff, the fact that Peter's losing his memory and losing his mind, the fact that Neverland is crumbling, and because Neverland is crumbling, Peter is dying. Like, these things are told to us over and over and over again. Like the author was afraid we weren't paying attention, or maybe we didn't get it the first time. Like either the author thinks we're stupid or didn't realize they had already mentioned it. So yeah, I don't feel like, I feel like the concept in the story was cool, but the execution was lacking. I like the concept of a frisky retelling of Peter Pan. I like the idea that Neverland exists in a dreamscape and that it's tied to this woman who's sort of broken and fragile. And because she's broken and fragile, Neverland is broken and fragile. And because Neverland is broken and fragile, Peter is broken and fragile. I think that all worked really well together. The sort of like modern, decrepit hellscape sort of Neverland that was portrayed, I think that worked really well. It made sense for the character and the backstory that she had. I can fully buy into these like monstrous half-fae or fae men sort of kidnapping these women named Wendy and trying to fix their world without much regard to what happens to these women after they've realized that they can't fix it. All of that worked for me. All of that made sense. But the storytelling fell down in the execution. It just wasn't there. And I feel like a lot of that was because it was in too much of a hurry to get to the smut and not interested enough in telling the story, which is really unfortunate because the story could have been really cool. Anyway, I wasn't wild about this book, but I didn't hate it, and I do have the next one in the series. It kind of came as a duo. There's a long, I think there's 3 or 4 books in this series, but I have the second one. If you are really, really interested in seeing me review it, you can sign up on Patreon. That gives you direct influence over my TBR. Other than that, hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Join us over on Discord, join the conversation. We talk about books, we talk about writing, we talk about all kinds of things, video games and that sort of thing. So yeah, thanks so much for hanging out with me. Have an excellent day, and I will see you in the next one.